G'day legends, Blake here with another video, and this week I've had quite a few questions from beginners wanting to set up planted tanks or having issues with their planted tank setup. So I started to answer these questions in the DMs, but realized it actually becomes quite a bit of a complex topic. So if you've ever tried to set up a planted tank and it's quickly turned into an algae filled mess or your plants have withered away to nothing, hopefully this video is going to help you. Let's jump straight into it. First of all, if you are new to the channel, my name is Blake. I've got a fish room here with over 50 aquariums in it, and I've been keeping planted aquariums for upwards of 6 years now in a variety of different forms. What do I mean by that? Planted tanks, like anything, with normal fish tanks, we can have community tanks, species only, breeding tanks. Well, planted tanks are kind of like that. You can have the full high-tech ADA spec where you got lights so bright that it'll burn a hole in your retinas if you're not wearing sunglasses. Or you can have just a normal, modest planted aquarium that's nice to look at, that maybe just has some green in it, nothing too crazy, but it's going to create a lot less headaches, I promise you. So somewhere along that spectrum is where we're going to land, and I'd recommend starting at the start, the easiest, and then adding in small little challenges to build up to that eventual ADA tank if that is the way that you want to go. So the first and the biggest problem I think people have when setting up live plants in an aquarium is growing algae instead of plants. And the key takeaway for this one, I think for beginners, is to understand that algae can take up nutrients in any form they like. So if we're talking about a human example here, algae can eat a bag of Skittles, algae can eat garbage from your neighbor's bin, algae can eat whatever it wants and take on those nutrients and be really happy and grow and thrive. Whereas plants, they'll need sort of the more recommended meat and 2 veg on a plate, kind of round meal, whole meal. So they'll need a piece of potassium, they'll need a piece of phosphorus, they'll need some nitrogen in there. They'll need all of these individual micro and macronutrients, which is a term you might have heard, but they will only collect it up into one nice round meal and gulp it down in a piece like that. So now that we understand that, we realize how dangerous it is. Well, not dangerous, I'm not trying to fearmonger here, but how algae comes about because we've got an excess of one or more of those nutrients. And we might be thinking, yeah, but I put liquid fertilizer in, so I should have a beautiful tank, no dramas at all. But liquid fertilizers are all made differently. So some liquid fertilizers might be high in nitrogen, some might be high in phosphorus, some might be high in whatever it is. And now that we know that we need a full complete meal for our plants to enjoy it, if we put in a fertilizer that has 1 part nitrogen, 2 parts phosphorus, 1 part everything else, then we know that eventually within that aquarium, we're going to get an excess of phosphorus, and that's what algae is going to eat on and thrive from. With that said, it doesn't mean that we need to go and get a full chemistry degree and a giant $10,000 water setup so that we can test every single individual thing. But all it just is something to be aware of so that if we do have an excess of algae pop up and it's as a result of putting a new fertilizer in or doing a big trim or whatever it is, then it's most likely an excess of one part of those nutrients, and then we just need to figure out how we're going to balance everything back out again. You might also be a little bit confused just then when I said doing a trim, and that's because if we're talking about plants as a body kind of taking up all of these meals of nutrients, well, if we have more plant matter, it's going to take up more of those nutrients. Doing a trim can actually affect quite a lot how often you need to fertilize, how intense your light is, because having a large body of plants is going to shade out some of the light from the lower parts of the aquarium and definitely take up a lot more nutrients than after that trim happens and your plants are kind of in recovery mode a little bit. So do be aware of the volume of plants you have in your tank, and you're far better off to do lots of little trims than letting it grow out of control and then cutting it back in half one day. So those kind of things can really help as well to save that algae sort of getting up and then battling it back down, and then algae coming back and then battling it back down. Another aspect of that is the faster your aquarium plants grow, the more they're going to uptake those nutrients. So if your tank is full of the often recommended for beginner plants, and I recommend these too, things like Anubias, Java fern, other rhizome plants, even Vallisneria, Cryptocorynes, and that sort of thing. Those are all very, very slow growing plants, and these are recommended because plants that are slow to grow are often slow to die. So it gives a bit more of a time buffer for you to be able to diagnose if there's a deficiency in any of these kind of nutrients or in light, but we'll touch on that in just a minute. So these slow growing plants are often recommended for beginners. However, they're also going to take up nutrients a bit slower as well. So it might be worth having a portion of the tank with slower growing plants and then a portion with faster growing stem plants at the back perhaps. I recommend Hygrophila polysperma as a nice easy one. Limnophila are also really easy as well and quite fast growing, although they do sort of spread around the tank. So if you want it confined to an area in the back corner, then Hygrophila is probably a good call for that one. Even some of the green rotalas and things like that are quite good. The good thing is that stem plants grow so fast that often people are trying to get rid of them. So you should be able to find some quite cheaply and be able to experiment. Even though you might lose some off, you should buy bunches of trimmings from people in the hobby really cheap. And don't be afraid to put something in, try it out, and keep trying until you figure it out. Because if you can get stem plants to work for you, then it opens up a whole new range of things and options for that planted tank of yours. Do be mindful though that there are quite a few plants within the hobby that are not fully aquatic. Dragon's Flame is one of them that comes to mind. Aluminium plant, or if you're American, aluminum plant. There's a few others. If it doesn't look like the other aquarium plants, then if it has purples or whites on it, pretty good indication that it's actually a semi-aquatic plant that can survive for periods of time underwater. And there's always people in the comments that's like, I've had an aluminium plant in my tank for 18 months and it's going fine. Eventually it will rot away and it will die. So just be mindful that those are temporary. And stick to fully aquatic plants, because it's going to be hard to diagnose something that's going wrong if the plant is kind of suffocating under the water anyway. Another one to be mindful of is how those plants like to take up the nutrients. Amazon swords, cryptocorynes, and a lot of the sort of lower to the ground aquarium plants, they're going to take up nutrients through their roots. So they're going to enjoy things like root tab fertilization, planted aquarium soil and things like that has nutrients in it. They don't really like to take water from they don't like to take fertilizer from the water column like stem plants do and like floating plants do, because that's just how those plants tend to work. So if your tank is full of Amazon swords, there's really no point putting water column fertilization in. You'd be better off just buying a bag of root tabs and loading that thing up with like 10 to 12 root tabs. And I think the good thing about root tabs as well is that there's a bit more of a buffer, I think, because it kind of slowly leaches out into the substrate. It's not like aquarium fertilizer, where if you just put like 50 pumps of fertilizer into the tank, then of course things are going to be a disaster zone pretty quickly. But you can quite easily put 4 or 5 root tabs underneath an Amazon sword, especially a big one, and have no problems at all. So in many respects, root tabs are a good one for beginner hobbyists, I think. I cannot speak English today. So we kind of touched on nutrients before and having to balance the nutrients, but it gets even more complicated than that. So, that's fantastic. There's also a balance we need to perform with 3 other things: nutrients, CO2, and light. Now, CO2 doesn't mean that you need to inject CO2. You might have seen a diffuser and people with a big gas tank next to their aquarium. You don't have to put CO2 in. It's going to be naturally occurring in your tank anyway. When people do put that into their tank, it's just to get extra CO2 because it makes the plants grow fast. But there'll be naturally occurring CO2 anyway, so don't stress about it too much. And light, we're talking about things like spectrum of light as well as intensity of light. So you can have, for example, a floodlight that you might buy from a hardware store. It's going to have a limited spectrum of light, but it's going to have a high level of intensity. I don't think we need to really overcomplicate these things. I think the topic's getting complicated enough, and I don't want to scare people off from keeping live plants, because once you figure it out, it makes fish keeping so much easier. You will have to do less water changes, and your fish will have much more natural places to hide. The environment changes dynamically so nicely, and I just think everything looks a lot more natural. So I definitely recommend not being scared off by these things, but they are important to know. So light intensity, you just need something that's going to be nice to look at. I'd recommend sort of more of the white color temperature than the orangey color temperature, although people have a personal preference with that. The only other thing I think is quite important to touch on with light is that blue light. Often you'll find aquarium lights will come with a moonlight setting. Well, plants cannot take up nutrients, photons from blue light, okay? Only algae can grow from blue light. So if you are leaving that moonlight, blue light on, maybe in a bedroom all night, then that's 12 hours, 10 hours that only algae is able to grow, not plants. So do keep that in mind, and I'd recommend just leave the light off, let the fish rest. I can sort of see the argument that outdoors, you know, there's always the moon in the sky, so it might be weird for a fish to have total darkness. However, a lot of the beginner-friendly fish are bred within the hobby anyway, so it's unlikely that a lot of the species you're gonna keep have ever been in an outdoor environment anyway. In terms of light duration, I reckon about 6 to 8 hours. Get a timer if you can, because everyone who doesn't have a timer thinks that they're able to put a consistent time in. However, speaking for myself, every time I've had that tank inside without a timer, I always forget to turn the light on, or I always forget to turn it off, and I'll have some days where it'll have 16 hours of light, some days where it'll have 2 hours of light, and you know, just your plants are unable to get that consistency that they really need and that we've talked about throughout this video. And what loves inconsistency? Algae. So it's going to create problems. Your plants are going to be dying and withering away, and having that sort of melted plastic bag look to them, and algae is going to come in, save the day, and say, oh, it's growing time, let's get into it. So consistent light period of around 6 to 8 hours depending on your light, but if you've just got sort of a normal light, then that should be a good photon period to have for your aquarium. In terms of that melted plastic bag look, if you just put your plants in the tank within the last month or so, don't panic about that. Sometimes they're converting themselves from immersed, which is above the water, grown plants, which often happens at farms because they have that available CO2 in the air and they grow a lot faster, to submerged, which is the underwater growth that we want in our aquariums. So if they're just new plants, that's fine. But if you put them in the tank for 6 months, they've grown and been happy, and then all of a sudden they look brown and kind of transparent, then that is a concern. You probably need to increase your nutrients, increase your fertilization, drop a root tab underneath it if it's a root feeder, or have a look into it. But that's definitely a warning sign. Some other warning signs are yellowing on the leaves, pinholes. There's a whole heap of charts online. If you look up aquarium plant diagnosis, then Google should give you a heap. I'll try and put one on the screen now so you can see, and maybe screenshot that if you like. But there's a lot of great tools now which shows you what the leaves are going to look like and what the problem's going to be, so that you can quickly identify and treat those problems, which is really good about living in 2025. Pinholes is quite a funny one, because in my 8-foot aquarium that I have behind me, I set it all up and everything was going fine, but my leaves were having a lot of little holes in them. And I didn't really click until it was too late that I put a bunch of clown loaches in the tank, and clown loaches are pretty well known for punching holes in aquariums. So fish can definitely be an issue when it comes to keeping planted aquariums. A lot of the cichlids are going to dig, are going to rip it. Plants are going to destroy your beautiful tank just for fun, so keep that in mind. Also, a lot of things like African cichlids are going to eat plants, so keep that in mind. Always research the fish stocking to see if plants are going to be compatible anyway. A lot of the schooling and shoaling fish are going to be perfectly fine for any plants, but some of the more big and boisterous ones are going to cause dramas for fine-leaved plants and more delicate plants, which I probably wouldn't recommend until you're sort of halfway down this path anyway. But it's just good to be aware of that sometimes fish just don't like plants, even though they're there to help each other out. Sometimes they just don't get along, like bad roommates. So if you do notice something weird since you've put a new fish in, it's probably that fish that's causing you the headache. One little hack I like to use for that is planting in terracotta pots. Terracotta pots mean that you have a movable plant that you can put in any tank you like. It's a really quick way to set up a new tank, because that plant pot and soil or gravel or whatever it is going to be chock full of beneficial bacteria. So you pretty much have an instant cycling mechanism, so you can set up more and more tanks and become a crazy person like me. But These are really great as well if you have a fish that you're not quite sure if they're going to get along with plants, but you want them to. You could put a terracotta pot with whatever plant that is in the tank, presumably the quarantine tank if they're a new fish, and then just sit them in there for a little while, see what happens. If they get along, it might be at least lowering the risk that they're going to come in and destroy your tank down the line. And I think that's probably how complicated I want to make it today. I don't want to really get too sciencey with these things and scare people away, as I mentioned. Keeping live plants in tanks is an absolute joy, and even though it sometimes comes with headaches, it's definitely worth doing. It makes your fish keeping hobby so much more enriched. And always remember this: you can't always buy new fish from the fish store, but you can always squeeze another plant into the back corner of your aquarium without anybody knowing. So if you do have that shopping addiction or that have to buy it kind of mindset, then planted tanks are probably the way to go. Certainly works for me. Other than that, if you do have any questions, or you think I've left anything out, please drop it down below. If you like my content, I've got another video right there for you to check out, and I hope you do. Other than that, it always helps me out to smash like, hit subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And happy fish keeping, and best of luck with your live plants journey. Thanks for watching.